Forced to marry for land, he said, "This is duty." The Apache girl replied, "No love." But in the end, the land had always been quiet, but that year it felt heavy, as if it knew something unwanted was coming. Wide fields stretched under the open sky, dry in places and stubborn in others, shaped by years of hard work and harder weather. For the rancher, this land was not just soil and fences. It was his past, his future, and the last promise he had made to his dying father, to never let it slip away. He was a man known for keeping his word. People said he was fair, steady, and not easily shaken, but they also said he kept his heart locked behind duty and silence. He believed emotions made men weak, and weakness had no place in a world where survival depended on clear choices. That belief had guided him well until the papers arrived. The documents were legal, cold, and final. The land he worked on stood on disputed ground. Old agreements, forgotten signatures, and shifting laws had caught up with him. Unless a new claim was secured, the ranch would be taken, divided, and sold. Everything he had built would be gone. The solution offered to him was not simple, and it was not kind. A marriage. The land bordered Apache territory, land protected not by wealth but by history and blood. The elders proposed an agreement, a legal marriage between him and a young Apache woman from their people. It would tie the claims together, stop outsiders from taking advantage, and protect both sides. On paper, it was practical. In reality, it was a life-altering decision for two people who barely knew each other. When the idea was first spoken aloud, the rancher said nothing for a long time. He stared out at the fields, jaw tight, hands resting on the table like stone. Marriage was not something he had planned for. He had never wanted a wife chosen by law instead of the heart. But the alternative was losing everything. "This is duty," he finally said, his voice low and firm. "Nothing more." The elders nodded. Duty was a language they understood well. Miles away, the Apache girl heard the decision with very different feelings. She was young but not foolish. She knew what such agreements meant. She had seen women give up dreams for the survival of their people. Still, when her name was spoken, her chest tightened. She was known for her honesty, sometimes to her own trouble. She believed words should match actions and promises should mean something. The idea of marriage without love felt empty to her, like a song without music. When she was told, she did not cry. She listened. She asked questions. She looked at the elders and then down at her hands. "If there is no love," she said quietly, "then say so. Do not dress duty as something it is not." Some elders frowned. Others looked away, but none denied her words. The first time she met the rancher, the air between them was stiff and careful. They stood facing each other like two people brought together by a mistake neither had made. He saw a woman with calm eyes and a straight posture, someone who carried pride without arrogance. She saw a man worn by responsibility, his face lined not by age but by worry. There were no smiles, no warmth, only an understanding that neither of them had chosen this freely. He spoke first, explaining the land, the law, and the reason for the marriage. He did not soften his words. "This will protect both sides," he said. "I won't pretend it's anything else." She met his gaze without fear. "Then do not expect me to pretend either," she replied. "I will not call duty love." Her honesty surprised him. Most people tried to please, to bend. She did neither. For a moment he felt something stir, respect perhaps, but he pushed it down. Respect was allowed, feeling more was not. The wedding itself was simple. No celebration, no joy, just signatures, witnesses, and quiet faces. People watched from a distance, whispering about how such a marriage could never last. Some felt pity, others felt anger. A few felt hope, though they did not say it aloud. Afterward, she went to the ranch with him, carrying only a small bundle of belongings. The house was sturdy but bare, built for work, not comfort. She walked through it slowly, touching nothing, observing everything. This would be her home now, whether she wanted it or not. He showed her the room that would be hers, not theirs, hers. He made that clear without words. Space, boundaries, distance. That was how he planned to survive this arrangement. That first night, the house felt too quiet. The wind moved outside, brushing against the walls like a question no one answered. He sat at the table, reviewing papers again and again, while she sat by the window, looking at the stars she did not recognize. Neither slept well. In the days that followed, they moved around each other carefully. He left early to work the land. She helped where she could, though no one had asked her to. The workers watched her with curiosity, unsure how to treat her. She noticed everything but said little. They spoke only when necessary, practical words, no emotion, yet tension hung in the air, not sharp but constant. Like a rope pulled too tight. One afternoon, while walking the boundary of the land, she stopped and knelt, brushing her fingers over the soil. He watched from a distance, unsure why the sight unsettled him. "This ground remembers," she said without looking up. "It remembers who cared for it and who only took." He frowned slightly. "Land doesn't remember," he replied. "People do." She stood, meeting his eyes. "That's where we are different." That difference lingered with him long after the conversation ended. At night, he thought of her words. During the day, he noticed her quiet strength, how she never complained, never asked for more than was given. She noticed how he paid fair wages, how he corrected others when they spoke disrespectfully about her people. Neither mentioned these things aloud. The marriage was still nothing more than duty, but the walls they had built began to show tiny cracks, not from love, but from something just as dangerous to their careful distance: understanding. And though neither would admit it, the land they had fought so hard to protect was already changing them, slowly and without permission. Days turned into weeks, and the house slowly filled with a kind of quiet that was heavier than silence. It was not peaceful quiet. It was the kind that came from two people choosing their words carefully, afraid that one wrong sentence might turn respect into conflict. They lived under the same roof, but their lives moved in separate lines, crossing only when necessary. Every morning, he woke before sunrise. Habit had shaped him that way. He dressed quietly, careful not to disturb her, even though her room was at the other end of the house. He drank his coffee standing by the window, looking out at the land, planning the work ahead. The land was predictable. It followed seasons and effort. People were harder. She woke later after the house had already settled into the day. She kept her routines simple. She cleaned, cooked when needed, and spent time outside whenever she could. The open sky made her feel less trapped. She missed the sounds of her people, the familiar rhythm of voices and shared work, but she carried that longing silently. They ate most meals separately. When they did share the table, the space between them felt larger than it was. Their conversations stayed practical. "The fence on the east side needs repair," he would say. "I saw that," she would reply. "I can help if you want." A pause would follow. Then, "Do what you feel is right." There were no arguments, but there was no closeness either. It was like walking on a narrow path where both were careful not to step too close. The workers on the ranch did not know how to act around her at first. Some avoided her. Others watched her with curiosity. She noticed the whispers, the glances, the uncertainty. Instead of reacting with anger, she chose calm. She greeted them kindly, helped where she could, and spoke when spoken to. Slowly, suspicion softened into acceptance. One afternoon, she joined the workers repairing a water channel. Her hands moved confidently, shaped by years of helping her own people. A few men looked surprised. One of them laughed lightly and said, "Didn't expect you to work like that." She smiled gently. "Work feeds us all," she replied. Word of that moment reached him by evening. He did not comment, but he watched her more closely after that. Not in a judging way, but with quiet attention. He noticed how she learned the land quickly, how she respected its limits instead of forcing it. He had spent his whole life doing the same, though he had never thought of it that way. Despite the calm surface, tension still lived between them. It showed itself in small things. Once, she rearranged the kitchen to make cooking easier. When he saw it, his first reaction was irritation. This was his house, his space. But when he tried cooking later, he realized her changes made sense. He said nothing, but he did not change it back. Another time, he made a decision about selling part of the harvest without consulting her. She heard about it from a worker and waited until evening to speak. "You did not ask me," she said quietly. He stiffened. "I didn't think I needed to." "I live here," she replied. "This land affects me too." Her tone was not accusing, just firm. It unsettled him more than anger would have. After a moment, he nodded once. "Next time," he said, "I will." It was a small promise, but it mattered. At night, the house felt different to each of them. For him, it felt unfamiliar, like something had shifted just enough to make him aware of every sound. For her, it felt lonely, but not unkind. She sometimes sat by the window, looking at the moon, remembering stories her grandmother used to tell about patience and endurance. One evening, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. The wind howled and rain fell hard against the roof. A loud crack of thunder startled her, and without thinking, she stepped into the hallway. At the same time, he came out of his room, checking the house. They stopped facing each other in the dim light. "The horses," he said. "I need to make sure they're secure." "I'll come," she replied. He hesitated. "It's dangerous." "So is being alone," she said simply. They went together, rain soaking them both, moving quickly through the storm. Working side by side, passing ropes, calming frightened animals, they moved with unspoken coordination. In that moment, there was no marriage, no duty, no land dispute, just two people protecting something living. When they returned to the house, wet and tired, something had shifted, not dramatically, but enough to be felt. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded. "You would have done the same for my people." "Yes," he admitted, "I would have." The words surprised him as much as they surprised her. The next days carried a different tone, still careful, still distant, but softer around the edges. He began asking her opinion more often, not because he felt forced, but because he realized she saw things he did not. She, in turn, began to trust his fairness, even when decisions were hard. Yet the outside world did not forget their unusual marriage. Neighbors questioned it. Some accused him of using her people, others accused her of giving up too much. Each comment added pressure. One evening, after hearing another rumor, she spoke again. "People think this marriage is a lie," she said. He leaned back in his chair. "Is it?" She thought for a long moment. "It began as one," she answered honestly, "but lies can change." He looked at her, searching her face. "Into what?" "That," she said, "depends on us." Her words stayed with him long after she left the room. Despite the growing understanding, fear still lived quietly in both of them. He feared losing control, letting emotions weaken the careful structure he relied on. She feared losing herself, becoming only a symbol or a solution instead of a person. One afternoon, she received a message from her people. They were struggling. Supplies were low and pressure from outsiders was increasing. She read the message in silence, her hands trembling slightly. He noticed. "What is it?" he asked. "My people need help," she said. "I didn't want to ask." He did not answer immediately. He thought of the risks, the cost, the opinions of others. Then he stood. "Tell me what they need," he said. That night, he arranged support quietly without asking for praise or recognition. When she found out, she looked at him with something close to disbelief. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I chose to." For the first time, she smiled at him, not politely, but genuinely. That smile stayed with him longer than he expected. Still, neither spoke of love. The word felt too heavy, too dangerous. What they shared was something quieter, built slowly through action and choice. It did not erase the past or promise the future, but it made the present easier to breathe in. They were still strangers in many ways, still bound by an agreement that had not asked their permission. But the walls between them were no longer solid. They had become doors, closed for now, but no longer locked. And though neither dared to say it aloud, both sensed that what had begun as duty was becoming something far more complicated and far more difficult to walk away from. The calm they had slowly built did not last long. Trouble has a way of arriving just when people begin to believe they can breathe easily. It came first as rumors, carried by passing voices and uneasy looks. Outsiders were asking questions about the land again. Papers were being checked. Old boundaries were being challenged. What had once seemed settled now felt fragile. He heard the news from a neighboring rancher who stopped by one afternoon. The man spoke in a low voice, glancing around as if the land itself might be listening. "There are people looking to buy claims," he said. "They're saying the marriage agreement might not be enough. They're digging into old records." When the neighbor left, he stood alone in the yard for a long time, staring at the horizon. He had fought too hard to lose everything again. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, heavier than before. This time it was not only his future at risk, it was hers, it was her people. That night he told her everything. He did not hide the fear in his voice, though he tried to keep it steady. "They're looking for weaknesses," he said, "any reason to break the agreement." She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "Then they will look at me," she said, "at who I am, where I come from." "Yes," he admitted, "and that's what worries me." She studied his face, searching for something. "Not the land?" she asked. "But me?" He hesitated, then answered honestly. "Both, but I won't let them use you." The words surprised them both. He had not planned to say them. They came from a place deeper than duty. From that moment, they began working together in a way they never had before. They reviewed documents late into the night, sitting at the same table, their shoulders not quite touching but close enough to feel each other's presence. She asked questions he had never thought to ask. He explained laws and contracts with patience, never talking down to her. "You see patterns," he said one evening, tapping a paper. "You notice what others miss." She smiled faintly. "My grandmother used to say survival depends on seeing what hides in plain sight." Their conversations grew longer. Sometimes they drifted away from the problem at hand and into memories. He spoke of his father, a strict man who had taught him that love was shown through work, not words. She spoke of her mother, who believed love was action but also softness. "You can be strong," she said once, "and still be kind." He thought about that long after she went to bed. The outsiders arrived a few days later. They were polite, well-dressed, and sharp-eyed. They walked the land, asked questions, and made notes. He stayed calm, answering clearly. She stood beside him, silent but steady. At one point, one of the men looked at her and said, "This arrangement seems unusual." She met his gaze. "So is history," she replied calmly. "That doesn't make it untrue." The man smiled thinly and said nothing more. After they left, tension hung thick in the air. He expected her to retreat, to grow distant again. Instead, she stayed close. "They will come back," she said. "Yes," he replied. "They will." That night, sleep did not come easily. He lay awake, listening to the house settle, thinking of every possible outcome. For the first time in his life, he realized how much he had to lose beyond land and reputation. The thought unsettled him. The next challenge came from closer to home. Some of his workers began to question the situation openly. One man spoke harshly, saying the agreement was risky, that trusting outsiders was dangerous. Before he could respond, she stepped forward. Her voice was calm but firm. "This land survives because people protect it together," she said. "Not because one voice shouts louder than another." Silence followed. Then he spoke. "She speaks for me," he said simply. From that day on, the doubts grew quieter. As pressure increased, so did the closeness between them. Not physical closeness, but something deeper. They shared worries, plans, and long walks along the edges of the land. They learned each other's rhythms. He noticed how she touched the earth before making decisions. She noticed how he always looked back to make sure others were following. One evening, while walking near the boundary, she stopped suddenly. If this fails, she said, my people will suffer. He turned to her. I won't let that happen. She shook her head gently. You cannot promise that. I can promise I will try, he said. With everything I have. Her eyes softened. That is more than duty. The words hung between them. Then came the meeting that could decide everything. Officials, lawyers, and witnesses gathered. The room felt cold despite the heat outside. He spoke clearly, laying out the facts. When questions turned toward her, she stood tall. I did not enter this marriage to be silent, she said. I entered it to protect life, land, and future. Her voice did not shake. He watched her with something close to awe. After hours of discussion, the decision was delayed. More review was needed, more waiting. The waiting was the hardest part. Days passed slowly. Each morning brought new tension. Each night ended with unanswered questions, yet through it all they stayed connected. Sometimes they sat together without speaking, finding comfort in shared presence. One night he broke the silence. If this ends, he said carefully, if the agreement is broken, you will be free. She looked at him for a long time. And you? She asked. I will lose the land, he said, but I won't regret protecting you. Her breath caught slightly. You would give it all up. Yes, he said, if that's what it takes. She stood and walked to the window, turning her back to him. For a moment he feared he had said too much. Then she spoke, her voice quiet. I have spent my life preparing to lose things, she said. I did not expect someone else to choose loss for me. He rose slowly and stood a few steps behind her, careful not to cross a line. I didn't expect to care, he admitted. She turned. Their eyes met. The space between them felt charged, fragile. This began as duty, she said, but duty does not make people stand like this. No, he agreed, it doesn't. They did not touch, they did not speak further. But something settled between them, something real and undeniable. A few days later the decision came. The agreement would stand. The land was secure. The claims were dismissed. Relief washed over him, strong enough to make his knees weak. He looked at her, ready to speak, but she was already smiling, softly, like someone who had survived a long storm. That night they shared a meal together, really shared it. They talked and even laughed once, surprised by the sound. The house felt warmer, lighter. Yet even in victory, questions remained. What now? What were they to each other beyond survival? Neither asked. Not yet. But as the fire burned low and the night settled around them, both knew one truth had changed forever. What had started as a forced agreement had become a choice, renewed each day through trust, courage, and quiet care. And neither of them was the same person who had once believed duty was all they would ever share. When the final decision came and the land was declared safe, the world did not suddenly feel perfect. Relief arrived, yes, but it carried weight with it. The danger that had once held them together was gone, and in its place stood a question neither of them had prepared to answer. Without the threat, without the pressure, what did their marriage mean now? For days after the ruling, life moved strangely. The ranch returned to its steady rhythm. Workers laughed more easily. Neighbors stopped whispering. The air itself felt lighter. Yet inside the house, a quiet tension returned, not the cold distance of before, but something more uncertain. He found himself watching her when she wasn't looking. The way she moved through the rooms as if they finally belonged to her. The way she paused before making decisions, as if listening to something unseen. He had grown used to her presence, to her voice, to the calm strength she brought into every space. Now, the thought of losing that made his chest feel tight. She felt it too. The safety she had wanted for her people had been secured, but her heart felt unsettled. She had prepared herself for sacrifice, for endurance, for walking away if needed. What she had not prepared for was choice. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with soft colors, he spoke the words he had been carrying for days. "You are free now," he said. She turned slowly, surprised by the calm in his voice. "Free," she repeated. "The agreement has done its work," he continued. "You owe me nothing. You can return to your people if you wish." He expected relief or maybe sadness. What he did not expect was the long silence that followed. She looked away, her gaze settling on the land outside the window. "You speak as if freedom is simple," she said finally. "I know it's not," he replied, "but it should be yours to choose." Her hands tightened slightly. "When I came here," she said, "I told myself this was temporary, that I would endure, protect what needed protecting, and then leave." "And now?" he asked quietly. "And now," she said, turning back to him, "I don't know where I belong." The honesty in her voice reached him deeply. He stepped back, giving her space. "I won't ask you to stay," he said. "I won't turn duty into a chain." She studied him, seeing something new in his face. Vulnerability, not weakness but openness. "You are different now," she said. "So are you," he answered. The days that followed were filled with careful moments. They worked side by side more often, sharing tasks without needing to speak. Sometimes they walked the land together at dusk, their footsteps falling into a shared rhythm. The distance between them had narrowed, though neither crossed it. People began to notice. Some assumed the marriage would now become real in the way they understood. Others believed she would leave soon. Opinions came and went, but neither of them paid much attention. The decision felt too personal to be shaped by outside voices. One afternoon, she received word from her people again. This time, the message was not urgent. It was an invitation to return, to take her place among them without fear or obligation. She held the message for a long time before showing it to him. "They are calling me home," she said. He nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "You should go," he said. She searched his eyes. "Is that what you want?" He took a breath. "What I want matters less than what you need." She looked down. "And if I don't know what I need?" "Then take time," he said. "I will wait." Those words settled something inside her, not pressure, not expectation, just respect. That evening she packed her belongings slowly and thoughtfully. He helped without being asked. There was no argument, no dramatic farewell, only quiet understanding. The morning she left, the air felt heavy again. He stood by the porch as she prepared to go. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." He nodded. "For what it's worth," he said, "this place will always be open to you." She paused, then spoke words that surprised them both. "This place already feels like part of me." With that, she left. Days passed, then weeks. The ranch remained, but something essential was missing. He went through his routines, worked the land, spoke to people, but everything felt flatter, quieter. He realized how much she had shaped his days, his thoughts, even his sense of purpose. At night, he thought of her words, her presence, her steady gaze. He understood now that duty had never truly defined him. Love had been there all along, waiting for him to recognize it. Meanwhile, among her people, she found comfort and familiarity. Yet something tugged at her constantly. She missed the land, the house, and the man who had given her freedom when he could have demanded loyalty. Her elders noticed the change. One asked gently, "Where is your heart?" She answered without hesitation, "It is divided." Time did what it always does, it clarified. She realized that love was not something that arrived suddenly. It was something built, chosen, protected. She had found that in an unexpected place. One morning she made her decision. When she returned, he was repairing a fence. He looked up, disbelief crossing his face. "You came back," he said. "Yes," she replied, "because this time it is my choice." He set down his tools, unsure what to say. "I will not stay out of obligation," she continued. "I will stay only if you want more than duty." He met her eyes, his voice steady but full. "I do," he said. "I want partnership, respect, a future we build together," she smiled softly. "Then I will stay." They stood there for a long moment, the land stretching around them, quiet and patient. Nothing dramatic happened, no grand gesture. Just two people choosing each other freely. For the first time since their marriage began, there were no contracts, no threats, no expectations, only intention. And in that choice, they both felt something settle into place, not like an ending, but like a beginning they were finally ready to claim. The morning after she returned felt different from any morning before it. The sun rose slowly, spreading light across the land as if nothing had changed, yet everything had. The wind moved gently through the fields, and for the first time the quiet felt warm instead of heavy. They did not rush into anything. There was no sudden closeness, no promises spoken too quickly. What they shared now felt too important to hurry. This time they were not bound by fear or duty. They were bound by choice. They began the day as they often did, with work. He repaired the fence while she checked the garden she had once helped start. Their movements were natural, comfortable. Sometimes they exchanged a few words. Sometimes they worked in silence. Neither felt the need to fill the space. Later they sat together on the porch, drinking tea as the afternoon settled in. The land stretched before them, strong and steady, just like the life they had slowly built. "I want to be clear," she said at last. "I did not come back because I had nowhere else to go." "I know," he replied. "I came back because I chose this," she continued. "I chose you, but choice must be honored every day." He nodded. "I understand, and I promise you this: nothing here will ever be forced again. Not words, not feelings, not staying." She studied his face, then smiled. "That is all I ever wanted." From that day on, their marriage began again, but this time without shadows. They spoke more openly. They shared meals not out of habit but because they wanted to. They laughed more often, sometimes surprised by how easy it felt. The workers noticed the change first. The house no longer felt divided. There was warmth in the way they moved around each other, in the way they listened. Respect had grown into something deeper, something steady. One evening, as they walked the land together, she stopped and looked around. "This place feels alive," she said, "not just because of the soil, but because it is cared for." He smiled. "You taught me that land remembers," she nodded, "and people do too." They began making plans, not grand ones but real ones, improving water systems, sharing profits fairly, supporting her people openly instead of quietly. The land became a bridge instead of a border. When neighbors came with questions, they answered together. When problems arose, they faced them side by side. No one spoke for the other. They stood as equals. At night, the house no longer felt empty. Sometimes they talked late into the evening about small things, stories from childhood, hopes they had never spoken aloud. Other nights they simply sat together, comfortable in silence. One night, as the fire burned low, he spoke words he had once believed he would never say. "I used to think love was weakness," he said, "that it distracted from responsibility." She looked at him gently. "And now?" "Now I see it as what gives responsibility meaning," he replied. She reached for his hand, not dramatically but naturally. He held it, feeling the truth of the moment settle into him. Life did not suddenly become perfect. There were disagreements, hard days, moments of doubt. But now those moments were faced with honesty instead of distance. Seasons passed. The land thrived. Her people visited often, welcomed without tension. Children laughed in the fields. The ranch became a place of connection instead of division. One afternoon, an elder from her community visited and watched them work together. Later, he said quietly, "This began as duty, but it has become something stronger." She smiled. "Yes, it became choice." Years later, people would speak of their story. Some would say it was about land. Others would say it was about survival. But those who knew them best understood the truth. It was about two people who were forced into a life they did not choose, and who stayed long enough to turn it into one they did. It was about learning that love does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it grows quietly, through respect, patience, and courage. And in the end, when duty stepped aside, love remained, not as a promise spoken once, but as a decision made every single day.